I am going to begin this one on an ordinary grey afternoon in the autumn of 1819, in a quiet village in Shropshire, with a woman of 40 standing in her garden among the last of the year's roses, because that is the moment her whole life turned over, though she did not know it yet, and I want you standing there with her when it does. Her name was Miss Margaret Holt, and she was, by the unanimous and oft-repeated verdict of the entire parish, a spinster who had missed her chance. They said it kindly, mostly. That is the particular cruelty of it, it was said with sympathy, with a shake of the head and a lowered voice. Poor Miss Holt, such a good woman, such a pity she never married. The pity of people perfectly comfortable in their own settled lives, for a woman they had decided had failed at the one thing a woman was for. She was 40 years old. She had buried her mother young, and her father lately. She had run the house at Combe Grange for 20 years, and run it beautifully. She had seen all three of her younger sisters wed and settled and gone, and she had herself, somehow, never married, and the parish had long ago closed the book on her, filed her under missed her chance, and turned to more interesting subjects. She was a fixture now, like the church or the green, Miss Holt of the Grange, the kind, unlucky spinster who had let her chances slip by until there were none left, and who would, everyone agreed, grow old alone in that big house, and it was a shame, and what was for dinner? That is who was standing in the garden among the roses on that grey autumn afternoon. A tall, straight, handsome woman, handsomer at 40 than the parish ever gave her credit for, with grey just beginning at her temples, and a stillness in her face that the unobservant called resignation, and that was in truth something a great deal deeper and harder won. She had her shears in her hand. She was cutting the last of the roses. She had made her peace, or believed she had, with the long, quiet emptiness of the life that stretched in front of her, now that the duty that had filled her years was discharged, and her father in the ground and the house, finally, terribly, her own, and silent. And then the gate at the bottom of the garden opened. She looked up, expecting the curate, or a tenant, or one of the 100 small, ordinary callers a country day brings. And a man came through the gate, a stranger, by his travelling clothes, dusty from the road, with grey at his own temples, and a brown, weathered look about him that spoke of far hotter suns than ever shone on Shropshire. A man of perhaps 40, well dressed in the plain, expensive way of money that does not need to announce itself, who came a few steps up the path, and then stopped, quite still, looking at her. And Margaret Holt looked back at the stranger across her autumn garden, with her shears in her hand and the last roses at her feet, and the colour went out of her face, and then flooded back into it, and the shears slipped from her fingers and fell soundless onto the grass. Because she knew him. 20 years older, 20 years browner, 20 years a stranger, but she knew him, the way you know your own name, the way you know the thing you have not let yourself think of in 20 years, because thinking of it was more than you could bear. She knew him, and the knowing went through her like a blade, and she stood rooted among her roses, unable to speak, unable to breathe, unable to do anything at all, but stare at the impossible grey-templed ghost who had just walked back through her garden gate after 20 years on the far side of the world. And I am going to stop us right there. Right there, with Margaret Holt's shears in the grass and the colour wild in her face, and the man from the gate stopped halfway up the path, not daring to come closer, and 20 years standing between them in the grey autumn air like a thing you could touch. Because before I tell you who he was, and where he had been, and why his coming back was about to undo every kind word the parish had ever pitied her with, you and I have our arrangement. Find the subscribe button and press it. It is free, and it takes a moment, and it means the next story finds you the instant I have it ready, and there is always a next, and they are always worth the having. And if you will not, then you owe me one, and I am very patient about my debts, and I never, ever forget. And this is a story about how long a faithful heart can wait, so you may believe me when I say I can wait as long as it takes for you to find that button. Now, before I let either of them speak, and oh, they have 20 years of things to say, I must take you back, all the way back, to a summer when Margaret Holt was 20 years old and had not yet missed any chance at all, but was standing, without knowing it, at the very gate of the only one that ever mattered. Come back with me. You will want to understand what was stolen before you see it given back. She was 20 that summer, the summer of 1799, and she was not a spinster then, but the loveliest girl in the parish, the eldest and the brightest of the 4 Holt sisters, with the whole bright future of a well-born girl spread out before her like a meadow in June. The Holts were gentry, not grand but old and respectable, with the Grange and a few hundred acres, and a name that meant something in that corner of Shropshire, and Margaret, as the eldest, was expected to marry well and marry first, to set the pattern for her sisters and bring some advantageous connection into the family. Her father, Mr. Holt, was very clear on the point. He was a proud man, old Mr. Holt, proud of his name, prouder of his blood, the kind of country gentleman who has not very much, but guards the little he has like a dragon on a hoard. And he had plans for his handsome, clever eldest daughter, and those plans did not, you may be sure, include the young man she actually fell in love with. For Margaret Holt, that golden summer, fell in love with Thomas Calder. And Thomas Calder was, by every measure, old Mr. Holt cared about, entirely unsuitable. He was a good man, that was never in question. Even her father never said a word against his character, but he was nobody. The son of the village apothecary, clever and ambitious and poor as a church mouse, with a quick mind and a warm laugh, and not 1 acre nor 1 penny, nor 1 drop of gentle blood to his name. He had been to the grammar school on charity, and meant to make something of himself, and there was iron in him, and a fierce honest hunger to rise. But he was, that summer, 22 years old, and worth precisely nothing, and he had committed the unforgivable crime of falling in love with the squire's daughter, who had committed the equal and opposite crime of loving him back. And oh, how they loved each other! I will not draw it out, for you have been young, or you are young, and you know how it is, the long summer walks along the river, the meetings that were not quite accidents, the whole world narrowed down to one face, the particular incandescent certainty of a first love that believes, with its whole heart, that nothing on earth can stand against it. They were not foolish children. That is what I want you to understand. They were grown, the both of them, and serious, and what was between them was not a passing fancy, but the real and rooted thing, the thing that comes, if it comes at all, perhaps once in a life. Margaret Holt looked at Thomas Calder and saw the whole of her future. Thomas Calder looked at Margaret Holt and found a reason to become every fine thing he had it in him to be. And her father found out, and put his foot down, and the dragon woke on its hoard. He forbade it, utterly, furiously, finally. No daughter of his would throw herself away on an apothecary's penniless son. The thing was unthinkable. It would not be discussed. And when Margaret, who had her father's own iron in her, stood up to him and declared she would marry Thomas Calder or no one, old Mr. Holt did a thing that was, in its way, even crueler than a flat refusal, because it wore the mask of reason. He did not forbid it forever. He merely required that Thomas Calder prove himself first. "Let the boy make his fortune," said Mr. Holt. "If he is so sure of himself, let him go out into the world and come back a man of substance, fit to keep my daughter in the manner she was born to. And then, we will talk of marriage. I will not have her wed a pauper, but I am not an unreasonable man." He spread his hands, reasonable as a snake. "Let him go and earn her. If his feeling is real, a few years' parting will not cool it, and if it is not real, why then, better to know it now. It sounds almost fair, does it not? That is the genius of the cruel. They make their cruelty sound like sense. For old Mr. Holt knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that a young man with nothing, sent out into the world to make a fortune, most often makes nothing at all and is never heard from again. He knew that years and distance and silence are the great enemies of young love. He knew, in short, that he was not setting a fair test, but laying a trap, and that the likeliest outcome by far was that Thomas Calder would sail away and vanish, and Margaret would, in time, give him up and marry sensibly as she ought. He was not gambling. He was as good as getting rid of the boy, and looking generous while he did it. And Thomas Calder, 22 and proud and full of iron, walked straight into the trap, with his eyes open and his head high, because he could see no other road. He would go. He would make his fortune. He would come back worthy, and claim her, and shove his success in the old dragon's face. He had heard, as ambitious poor young men did in those years, that fortunes were to be made in India by any man with nerve and brains and a strong constitution, and he had both nerve and brains in abundance, and he was young enough to believe his constitution would hold, and so he resolved to go out to India, into trade, and not to come home until he was a rich man. They had one evening to say goodbye, down by the river, in the last of a summer that neither of them would ever see the like of again. I was not there, of course, by the river that last evening, but the thing they promised each other is the hinge of this whole story, and I have it as faithfully as such things are ever handed down, and I will give it to you plain. They promised to wait. That was all, and it was everything. Thomas would go to India and make his fortune, however long it took. 5 years, he thought, perhaps 7, and Margaret would wait for him, and refuse every other offer, and keep faith, and they would write. That was the lifeline, the thing that would carry the love across the years and the oceans. They would write to each other, every week, faithfully, so that though the distance between them was half the world, the line between their two hearts would never go slack. Write to me, she said, and I will write to you, and however long it is, I will be here. I will not marry. I will wait if it takes a lifetime. And Thomas Calder, holding both her hands by the dark river, swore the same, that he would write and work and come back for her if it took everything he had, and that there was not a woman in all of India, nor all the world, who could turn his heart 1 inch from where it was given. And then he went. He sailed within the month, a poor young man on a crowded Indiaman, with nothing but his wits and his promise. And Margaret Holt stood on English ground and watched the road that had taken him, and began to wait. She waited well, at first, because the letters came. Oh, they came. For the first while, they came. It took the better part of a year for the earliest of them to win their way home from India, but when the first one came at last, salt-stained and travel-battered and covered all over, in Thomas's quick, eager hand, Margaret Holt wept over it for an hour, and then read it 40 times, and then sat down and wrote back 6 pages on the spot. And so it began, the long, slow correspondence across the world, each letter half a year on the water, so that they were forever answering things the other had written an age ago. But it came, the line held, and Margaret waited, and hoped, and lived for the next salt-stained packet from the far side of the earth. And then the letters stopped. Not all at once. That is the thing that made it so cruel, and so slow to understand. They simply thinned, came less often, and then, somewhere in the 2nd year, stopped altogether. And Margaret Holt waited by the road for letters that did not come, week after week, month after month, telling herself there had been a delay, a lost ship, a packet gone astray. There were 100 honest reasons a letter might not come from India, until the months became a year, and the year became 2, and the silence stretched on and on and on, total and final and unbroken, and the dreadful explanation that she had refused for so long to look at became, at last, impossible to refuse. He had stopped writing because he had stopped caring. That was what the silence said. That was what her father said too. Gently now, oh so gently. The trap sprung, and the dragon kind in victory. These things happen, my dear. He is young. India is full of temptations and opportunities. Very likely he has done well for himself, and made a new life out there. You must not blame him. Men are made so. Better to face it and move on. And Margaret, with 2 years of total silence pressing down on her, with no letter and no word and no reason left to hope, finally, slowly, the way a great tree comes down, let herself believe it. Thomas Calder had forgotten her. He had gone out into the wide world, and the wide world had won, as her father had always known it would, and the boy who had sworn by the dark river that no woman on earth could turn his heart had let it be turned after all, and she was a fool who had wasted 2 years waiting for a man who was not coming back. She grieved him as you grieve the dead, and then, because she was made of iron and could not lie down in the road forever, she got up, and she went on, and she folded the whole of it away into the deepest and most locked-up room of her heart, and she never spoke his name again. But here is the thing, my dears. Here is the thing she did not know, and would not know for 20 years, and that I am going to tell you now, because I cannot bear for you to sit through what comes next, believing the lie along with her. Thomas Calder never stopped writing. He wrote every week. For 2 years and more, he wrote every single week, faithful as the sunrise, long, eager, loving letters full of his struggles and his small triumphs, and his unshaken certainty that he was working his way home to her, and not one of those letters, not a single one, ever reached Margaret Holt's hands. And the 6-page answers Margaret poured out in that first year, before the silence broke her, those never reached Thomas either. For old Mr. Holt was the master of his own house, and the keeper of his own gate, and every letter that came to the Grange passed first through his hands, and every letter that left it as well. And old Mr. Holt had sprung his trap, and had no intention whatever of letting a parcel of love letters spoil it. He took them, all of them. Thomas's coming in, and Margaret's going out. He stopped them at the door, both directions, and the lovers on either side of the world wrote faithfully into a silence that one proud old man had manufactured with his own 2 hands, each of them slowly concluding, exactly as he intended, that the other had ceased to care. He told himself it was for her own good. They always do. He told himself he was sparing his daughter a fool's marriage to a nobody, protecting her, saving her from herself, and perhaps, in the rotten depths of him, he half believed it. But what he was doing, in plain truth, was stealing 20 years from 2 people who loved each other, to satisfy his own pride, and he very nearly got clean away with it. Hold that knowledge now. Hold it the whole way through what comes next, that terrible long stretch of years, because Margaret did not have it, and the not having is the whole of her grief. 20 years is easy to say and hard to live, and I will not march you through every one of them, but you must feel the weight, because the weight is the point. Margaret Holt was 21 when she gave Thomas Calder up for dead to her, and she was 41 before she learned the truth, and in between lay the long grey country of a life that was not the life she was meant to have. She did not marry, that is the headline, the thing the parish saw and pitied. Miss Holt never married, but they never knew the half of why. They assumed, the parish did, that no one would have her, or that she was too proud, or too plain, or simply unlucky. The truth is that Margaret Holt had offers, several over the years. She was handsome and well-bred, and ran a good house, and more than one sensible Shropshire gentleman thought she would make an excellent wife, and she refused them, every one. Not out of pining, she was past pining, she had buried that, but out of something harder and truer. She had loved once, with the whole of her heart, and she found she had no smaller coin to pay. She could not give a man a portion of a heart that had been given entire, even to a memory, even to a man she believed had forgotten her. She would not marry without love, and she had spent her whole capacity for love by a dark river 20 years before, and so she did not marry at all. The parish called it missing her chance. She knew it for what it was, and never explained, because the explanation was locked in a room she did not open. And she did not, mind you, spend those 20 years idle or sad. That is the other thing the pitying parish got wrong. Margaret Holt lived, fully, usefully, and with a quiet, unshowy strength that was the marvel of everyone who actually troubled to know her. Her mother died when Margaret was 25, and Margaret stepped into her place and ran the Grange and raised the tail end of her 3 sisters and managed her increasingly difficult father, all of it with a competence that held the whole family together. She saw her sisters through their courtships and their weddings, danced at all 3, the unmarried eldest, and never once let the ache of it show. She was the one the tenants came to, and the poor of the parish, and the sisters with their troubles, and the father with his gout and his tempers. She was the strong, still centre that everyone leaned on, and no one thought to ask after, because the strong are never asked after. That is the tax on strength. She was loved, in the deep, unspoken way a community loves its backbone, and she was, underneath it all, profoundly and invisibly alone, wanted by everyone for what she did, and known, truly known, by no one at all, because the one person who had ever known her was 20 years gone across the sea, and had, she believed, forgotten her name. And her father grew old, and grew ill, and the last years of him were the hardest of all, for old Mr. Holt did not die quick and clean but lingered, querulous and demanding, through a long decline, and it was Margaret, of course, always Margaret, who nursed him through it. The sisters were married and away, the burden fell where it always fell, and Margaret Holt gave the last of her own dwindling youth to the bedside of the very man who had stolen her future, and never knew it, and tended him faithfully to the end, out of a daughter's duty he had done nothing to deserve. He died in the winter of 1818, when Margaret was 39, died with his secret, you would think, safe in the grave with him. But the cruel do not always get to keep their secrets, and old Mr. Holt had made one mistake, one small human mistake, and I have wondered all my life whether it was conscience or only the hoarder's inability to throw a thing away, for in all those years he had not destroyed the letters. He had kept them. She found them in the spring after he died. She was clearing his study at last, a thing she had put off for months, for it is a hard business, going through a dead parent's papers, harder still when the parent was difficult and the grief is tangled. And at the back of a locked drawer in his great desk, behind the deeds and the dull accounts, she found a box, a japanned box, black with a faded gilt pattern, locked, with the little key tied to it by a thread, as though her father had meant, someday, to be rid of it and never had. She opened it, expecting old documents. It was full of letters, tied in bundles, with ribbon gone grey with age. Dozens of them, scores, and the top one, when she lifted it out with no idea yet what she held, was addressed in a hand she had not seen in 20 years, and had never, not for one single day of those 20 years, truly forgotten. And it was addressed to her, to Miss Margaret Holt, Combe Grange, Shropshire, England, and it was postmarked, in faded ink, from Calcutta, in the year 1800. And it had never been opened. I want to let you sit in that room with her, because I think it is one of the most terrible, and one of the most important moments in this whole long tale. Margaret Holt, 40 years old, sitting on the floor of her dead father's study in the spring light, holding an unopened letter from Thomas Calder, 20 years old, postmarked the very year she had decided he'd forgotten her, and beginning, slowly, with hands that had gone quite numb, to understand. She opened it. Of course she opened it, 20 years too late. And there, in Thomas's quick, eager, unchanged hand, was a young man's heart, poured out across half the world. His struggles in that first hard year, the heat and the strangeness and the work, his fierce determination, and threaded through every line of it, plain and constant as a heartbeat, his love for her, his certainty of her, his counting of the days until he could come home worthy and claim her. I think of you every hour. I am working only for this. Wait for me, Margaret. I know you are waiting. I feel it across all this distance, and I will come back to you if it takes my whole life. And there were scores more. She read them all, that day and into the night, sitting on the floor and then by the fire, working through the bundles in order as the dreadful shape of the truth rose up out of them. For they were dated, and she could follow them, week by faithful week, across the first 2 years, the letters growing not colder but more anxious, more bewildered, as Thomas wrote and got no answer. "Why do you not write? Has something happened? Your father said nothing of trouble. I have had no word in so long." The desperate hope curdling, slowly, into a grief that mirrored her own exactly, on the far side of the world, at the very same time. "I begin to fear you have changed your mind, and I cannot blame you. 2 years is long, and I have nothing yet to offer." And then, in the last letters of all, a young man letting go of hope with a dignity that broke her heart clean in two. "If you have given me up, I will not reproach you. Only know that I never gave you up, and never shall, whatever becomes of me. If this is the last, then God keep you, Margaret. You were the best of my life." And then they stopped, because he had concluded, exactly as she had, that he was forgotten, and the silence on his side, you understand, had been just as total and just as manufactured, for not one of her letters had ever reached him either. Her father had seen to both halves of it. And there, at the bottom of the box, beneath Thomas's letters, Margaret found the rest of the proof, and it was the cruelest part of all. Her own letters, her own 6-page answers from that first year, the ones she had written and sealed and given to the household to post, full of her love and her faithfulness and her counting of the days, never sent. Stopped at the door, kept in the box with his, the 2 halves of a stolen correspondence, the whole murdered conversation, locked in the dark for 20 years by the man who slept now in the churchyard and would never have to answer for it. Margaret Holt sat by her fire as the dawn came up, surrounded by the wreckage of her own stolen life, and understood, finally and completely, the thing her father had done. He had not let her give Thomas up. He had made her give him up, with a lie 20 years long, built letter by stolen letter, and he had made Thomas give her up the same way, and the 2 of them had spent the whole of their youth grieving a betrayal that had never happened, mourning a faithlessness that was, on both sides, the purest and most unbroken faith. I will not pretend her first feeling was anything but rage. Rage at the dead, which is the most helpless rage there is, for there is no one left to rage at, only a name on a stone and 20 empty years. She wept and she raged and she grieved all over again, for the second time and somehow worse than the first, because the first grief had at least been clean. She had believed herself unloved, and this one was the grief of knowing she had been loved all along, perfectly, faithfully, across all that distance and all that time, and that it had been stolen from her, and that it was, surely, now far too late to matter. For that was where it left her, in the grey spring of 1819, 40 years old, alone, her father dead, and her youth spent, and the truth at last in her hands. And what use was the truth? Thomas Calder was 20 years gone. India, that great devourer of young Englishmen, had very likely killed him long since, as it killed so many. Or if he lived, he had surely, after all these years, made the life she'd been told he made. A wife, a family, a fortune, a world entire on the far side of the earth, with no room in it for a Shropshire spinster and her box of 20-year-old letters. She had the truth now. The truth had simply come too late to be anything but one more grief. She put the letters back in the box, and she closed it, and she set herself, with the last of her iron, to make her peace, a second time, with a life that was over before it had rightly begun. That is where she was, only a few months on from that grey dawn, when the gate at the bottom of her garden opened, and a brown-faced stranger with grey at his temples came up the path, and stopped, and looked at her, and her shears fell into the grass. Now I have brought you all the way round, and we are back in the autumn garden where we began, and I may at last let them speak. So lean in close, because what passes between 2 people who have each just discovered the other, never stopped loving them, is not a thing said loudly. For a long moment, neither of them could say anything at all. He stood halfway up the path, she stood among her fallen roses, and 20 years hung in the air between them, and the first thing either managed was Margaret, in a voice she did not recognize as her own. Thomas. Margaret. He said it like a man saying a word in a language he had not been permitted to speak in 20 years. And then, helplessly, all the careful distance of his approach collapsing. You're here. You're still. I came back only to see the place. I told myself that was all. I never let myself believe you'd still. I was certain you were married and gone these 20 years. I came to look at the river one last time, like a fool, and I asked at the inn, and they told me. They said Miss Holt. His voice broke on it. Miss Holt. After all this time. And I could not understand it, Margaret. I could not for the life of me understand why you never married. And Margaret Holt looked at this man, older, browner, greyer, a stranger, and the most familiar soul on earth, the boy she had buried alive in her heart 20 years before, standing impossibly in her garden, and she found that the rage and the grief of that grey dawn had a use after all, for she could give him, in one sentence, the thing they had both been robbed of. Because you never stopped writing to me, she said. He went very still. I found them, she said, this spring, after my father died, a box, locked in his desk. Your letters, Thomas, every one. 2 years of them, every week, faithful as anything I ever saw in my life, and not one of them ever reached me. He took them all, at the door, coming and going, yours to me and mine to you, and he kept them locked in a box for 20 years, and he let us both believe. Her voice cracked at last, and the tears came. He let me believe you had forgotten me, and he let you believe the same of me, and we were neither of us faithless, Thomas, not for one single day. We were robbed, he robbed us. We have grieved each other for 20 years for a betrayal that never happened. And I wish you could have seen the man's face as he understood it, as the whole monstrous shape of it came clear to him, the same shape that had risen up out of the box and broken Margaret's heart a second time in the spring, for it broke across him now, in real time, the grief and the rage, and then, rising up underneath, slow and terrible and shining, a thing he had not let himself feel in 20 years, which was hope. I thought you had changed your mind, he said, very low. I wrote, and you never. I thought you had come to your senses and forgotten the apothecary's boy, and I could not even blame you for it. I built my whole life on the certainty that you had stopped loving me, Margaret. I made my fortune on it. I worked like a man possessed, because the work was the only thing that filled the place where you had been. 20 years. I am rich now. Do you understand the joke of it? I am richer than your father ever dreamed. I am exactly the man of substance he demanded I become. I could buy the Grange 10 times over, and I made every penny of it, grieving for a woman I believed had given me up, who never gave me up at all. He took a step toward her, and another. I never married either. There were chances. God knows. A rich man does not want for chances, and I could not. I told myself it was the work, or the climate, or that I was too set in my ways. The truth is, I could not give any woman a heart that was buried in Shropshire by a river 20 years ago. I waited too, Margaret. I never once let myself call it waiting, because waiting means hope, and I had no right to hope. But that is what it was. I waited too, the whole time. I waited too, and there it was, the thing the whole parish had got so completely wrong. They had pitied a spinster who had missed her chance, and her chance had not been missed at all. It had only been stolen, and kept faith on both sides across 20 years and half the world, and walked back through her garden gate on an autumn afternoon to be claimed at last. She crossed the last of the distance to him herself. Margaret Holt was never a woman to wait for a man to cover the final ground, not even this one, not even now, and she took his weathered face in her 2 hands, the face of the boy she had loved and the stranger he had become, both at once, and she said the thing that was the whole truth of her. 20 years, she said. They stole 20 years from us, Thomas. I am 40 years old. My youth is gone, and yours, and we can none of us have them back. And I have spent this whole summer telling myself it was too late, that you were surely dead or married or changed past knowing, that the truth had come too late to be anything but one more grief. Her thumbs moved against his cheekbones. And here you are, old and grey and brown as a nut, and the dearest sight these eyes have seen in 20 years. So I am done. Do you hear me? I am done letting that man steal one more day from us than he already took. He took our youth. He does not get our age as well. He does not get one single hour more. And Thomas Calder, rich man, fortune maker, the apothecary's son who had crossed the world and back with one woman in his heart the whole way, put his arms around Margaret Holt in her autumn garden among the fallen roses, and held on as though 20 years could be undone by holding tight enough, and wept into her grey-streaked hair, and laughed, and wept again. "Marry me," he said, when he could speak. "Now, at once. We have wasted enough time to last 10 lifetimes, and I will not waste 1 hour more. Marry me, Margaret Holt, and let me spend whatever years that thief left us, proving what I have known since I was 22 by a river, that there was never anyone but you, and never could have been, in all the wide world I crossed to find my way back." "Yes," said Margaret. "Oh, you great fool, yes. 20 years ago, and now, and yes." And that, my dear listeners, is where the long wait ended. In a Shropshire garden, in the autumn, 2 people of 40 with grey in their hair and 20 stolen years behind them, finding out at last that neither had ever let the other go. They married within the month. There was no reason on earth to wait, and they had waited enough to last forever, and so they married quietly in the village church, where they had both been christened, with Margaret's astonished sisters in the pews, and half the parish crowded in behind, and the whole of Shropshire reeling at the news, for the kind unlucky spinster who had missed her chance had, it turned out, not missed it at all, but kept it for 20 years, and married it in the end. And the penniless apothecary's boy, who had sailed away and vanished, had come home the richest man in the county, and married the squire's daughter, after all, exactly as he'd sworn he would by the river, only 20 years, and 1 stolen lifetime late. And the parish, which had pitied her so comfortably for so long, did not quite know where to put itself, for there is nothing so confounding to people who have decided to pity you as the sight of you walking up the aisle, at 40, radiant, on the arm of a man who crossed the world twice over and never loved another soul. They had been so sure they knew her story. Poor Miss Holt, who missed her chance. And it turned out they had never known the first thing about her, nor about the long, faithful, patient heart they had filed away under spinster and never troubled to read. As for the years they had lost, I will not pretend to you that those came back, for they did not, and that is the grief that sits inside this happy ending and will not be entirely sung away. 20 years is 20 years. A thief stole them, and no wedding can return them. Margaret and Thomas were not given back their youth, but here is what they were given, and I have come to think it is not the lesser thing, only the different one. They were given the rest, and they spent the rest the way only people who have learned exactly what time is worth can spend it, fiercely, gratefully, wasting not 1 hour of it, treasuring the ordinary days that younger lovers squander, because they alone knew precisely what each day had cost, and how nearly they had not had it at all. They had near enough 30 years together in the end, 30 years when the world had given them up for a spinster and a lost man, and those who knew them said they had never in their lives seen 2 people so plainly, so completely, so unhurriedly happy. The love that had survived 20 years of silence and a continent and a lie did not have very much left to fear from anything, and it showed. If you ask me what this story is truly about, I will tell you it is about the lie the world tells, so confidently and so often, that love and joy and second chances belong only to the young, that a woman of 40 has missed her moment, that a heart once disappointed must stay shut, that what is not had by 5 and 20 is not to be had at all. It is a lie. It was a lie when the parish told it about Margaret Holt, And it is a lie still, wherever it is told. No one has missed their chance who has kept faith with their own heart. The years can be stolen, but the love cannot. Not really. Not if it is the true sort. It only waits, however long it must, on both sides of whatever ocean, for the box to be unlocked, and the gate to swing open, and the long, faithful waiting to be, at the last, rewarded. You have sat by my fire through 20 stolen years, and a thief in the churchyard, and a love that would not die however hard it was buried. And I will not pretend I could have told it without you at the other end of the line. If it has given you something tonight, a warmth, a hope, a quiet, stubborn certainty that it is never, ever as late as the world would have you believe, then I would ask you, before you go, to subscribe to Moonlight at Mayfair, for there are a great many more of these, and everyone has a heart, and I should hate for you to miss a single one. It costs you nothing, and it means more to me than I can say from this side of the fire. And if you still will not, well, you know what I am going to say. You owe me one, and I am, as this whole story has shown you, a creature of very great patience indeed. I never forget a debt. I will wait for it as long as it takes. Subscribe to Moonlight at Mayfair, and come back to me beneath the soft light of the evening star, where every love is